I think that's such a great point. I think, especially what you said about leaders, and in combination with it starts with you. Like when people always ask, because I think when people ask those questions, a lot of times what they're really asking is, "What's the quick fix? Give me a list of 10 things of the things I can and cannot call people. Give me the list of things I can and cannot do, and then boom, we'll be able to do it." But it's not that simple. Like relationships and interactions are multifaceted, and they have this complexity of humanity that comes into it. And I think there's a beautiful synergy here. Of it just made me think of The Office of all things. I'm a huge Office nerd. Love The Office. Very first episode, or like the second episode, is like Diversity Day, and the whole episode essentially that Steve Carell goes in and makes a Chris Rock joke in everyone, and that's why they had to show up. And the whole diverse thing is just for him for telling that joke. I think the important thing to remember is context, right? The reason why Chris Rock could tell the joke and it was funny is because he's a comedian on stage. And the reason Michael Scott couldn't is because he's not a comedian on stage, and this isn't really a space for that. So I think when people ask for the one fix of like, what's that one thing we can do? It's not, it's context. And you might have a relationship with someone or a friend that you can tell that joke to. But I can't give you a blank statement to say, hey, in all circumstances, this can't be it. So I really, really resonate with what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like we have more in common than I thought we would coming in. It's
Yeah.
like we hit the Harlem Renaissance. Now we're hitting TV shows, and yeah, we're two for two so far.
Yeah, which is fantastic. The one thing I want to jump into um, is your book, right? The light we give and how sick wisdom can transform your life. What does that mean?
Yeah, the title of the book. I struggled with the title for a long time, and a lot of writers I know struggle with their titles because it's got to be perfect, right? You got to capture like all the pages of the book in like 10 words. So it was tough, but ultimately, what I wanted to say, and I was starting to think of it as like, what's the essence of the book? Like, what's my main message? And the main message, it sort of goes back to something we were talking about earlier, which is, um, I want people to know and to feel that they have this inherent light inside of them. And this is what my tradition teaches. And I find that to be such a powerful way to address some of the hierarchies we create in society, right? Like we'll say, I'm better than you because of this, or you're better than me because of this. And, when we start thinking about ourselves as these embodiments of light, then we're like, oh, we're like all ultimately we have this same shared experience and we're connected to one another. And that I think was really important. And the other thing I wanted to say was like, it's not just it's not just something that we choose to give off. Like we're always illuminating the world around us, whether we realize it or not. And I want people to know that they have that power. I share this Punjabi folktale, excuse me, this Punjabi folktale at the beginning of the book about a lantern, and the sun is setting, and the sun is setting, and everyone's freaked out because they're like, it's going to get dark, and we're going to have no light, and nobody knows what's going to happen when the sun sets, and one lantern just lifts up its wick and says, I'm gonna challenge the darkness, and we'll see what happens. And I think it's that kind of self-awareness that doesn't require a feeling of supremacy, right? It's not about being better than others or having more light than others. It's just like, hey, we have this. Like it's the confidence that comes with an awareness of who we actually are, and that to me was in many ways like the core idea that I'm trying to share with people through the book.
I think that's so important. To me, what I hear, if I'm trying to regurgitate it and make sure I'm getting the essence of what's there, to me, what I would relate that to is, I think a lot of times when we go through life, we never question the personal motivations behind the particular decisions or why we engage in a particular manner. It reminds me a lot of when I was in college. I went to football at a very Christian conservative school, which is not at all how my personal views happen to be. One of the reasons I went there is because I was like, well, if I truly hold these things, I better hold them in this type of environment. Plus they're paying for me to play football, right? So to be completely transparent, they pay for me to come play football. I'm gonna come play football. But I had a lot of conversations, especially with my coach, and other people around the university that were very conservative and had kind of these ideologies that I didn't necessarily agree with, but were great people. They had, to your extent, now that you say this, I feel like they had a lot of light inside of them, and we didn't have to agree on things, but I could tell there was a light, and I would challenge them. We'd have great discussions, but at the end of the day, what I feel like came out of that was an understanding of themselves. Like sometimes I could see in the midst of us having a conversation, them realizing, actually, I don't know why I hold that belief. I remember there were several students that ended up becoming my best friends that while we were having conversations, like I remember one of my best friends, we were just in a wedding together. He was another best man, said to me, well, I was just, in the locker room, had Chicago Bulls hat. Derrick Rose was there at the time or recently. So I was a big Derrick Rose fan. And he just said, passing by, he was a white guy. He was like, "So do you actually like the Bulls, or are you just black?" And I just thought, I was like, "Seriously?" And so I addressed it right there, right, and just said, "Look, like, what are you doing? Like, that's completely racist. Like, let's have a conversation, whatever. Let it pass." And then through that, we had several follow up conversations because he was extremely apologetic. Was like, "Look, like, I don't really whatever." And through that, became friends, right? Like it wasn't like he said that. I was, "Oh, it's all good." Like, but I think part of that is a lot of times if you don't engage with these, you never question. You never have anybody pushing back on you. It becomes very difficult to move forward, or very difficult to kind of assess those things. And when I hear you, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like the book really kind of shines that and lets people understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's such a good example. And I have so many similar experiences. Part of what I'm sharing in my book is like, I grew up in Texas, in South Texas. My family, my brothers and me were the only ones wearing turbans down there. And so, racism was, constant. I mean, it wasn't every day, but it was pretty close. And, and we had to figure out pretty early, like, how are we going to deal with this without being angry all the time, or like other people's negative comes to you and it's so easy to take that in and spit it right back out, right? and
Yeah.
and I tried that, and I just wasn't happy. Like, it wasn't
Yeah.
satisfying to me, and we had to figure out a different way to deal with people. And this philosophy, um it came in really handy for me. And when I was writing the book, I mean, I was really inspired. um I started writing in 2016, and I felt like the country was falling apart, and all my friends were talking about, I can't sit at Thanksgiving dinner with my family anymore because we don't get along, or I hate my dad and I don't talk to him anymore. And I'm like, man, that's
It's rough.
brutal. Like,
Yeah.
I hear you on, the difficulty of getting along with people who see the world differently from you. Like, that's hard for me too, but like, it doesn't have to be so extreme, and it doesn't have to be so painful. Like, there are
Yeah.
ways to, it's one of the things you said. I was in a conversation with some of my favorite, memoirists. We were talking about writing, our books, and so we all sort of talked about our lives. And it was, Kwame Alexander, who's black, Javier Zamora, who is undocumented and came to this country, as a child, and me. And at the end of it, Kwame said this really cool thing that I haven't forgotten. He said, I feel closer to myself because, like, I feel closer to you because I know your story, but I actually feel closer to myself because I know your story. And like, I've been thinking about that a lot because I notice that works for me too. Like, as I get to know other people, this is sort of what you were describing. It's not just about, looking outward and feeling connected to people I don't know, which is really important, but it actually helps me understand myself better. And I think that's a really beautiful way to grow in this world.